I discovered my wife, Nancy, wasn't just unfaithful. She was involved with my father and brothers. The betrayal cut deep, and I was consumed by a mix of rage and disbelief. How could they? In the midst of my despair, I devised a plan. A cruel, calculated revenge that would make them pay for their deceit. They had no idea what was coming. This isn't just a tale of betrayal, it's a story of vengeance that will leave you stunned. Prepare for the unexpected. This is my story, and it's just beginning. Ron Black, known as Ronnie to friends and family, stared at the chart on his desk. But he couldn't focus on his work. His mind kept thinking about what he'd heard earlier about Nancy, his wife of 2 years. He used to believe his life was great, with a loving and beautiful wife. But 2 hours ago, that all crumbled. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your wife is cheating on you," Bill Jacobs said, sipping his beer. They were at the bar near the pharmaceutical company where they worked. Bill was more than just a co-worker to Ron. He was a friend. "How do you know?" Ron asked. Bill took another sip of beer before answering. "I overheard some guys in the lab talking in the men's room," Bill explained. "They were bragging about being with her at the last company party." "Damn," Ron muttered. That made sense now. The company often had parties for employees and their spouses in the new lounge. The lounge had a big stage for bands and a huge TV for movies. It was also used as a break room during work hours. The latest party had been just 2 weeks ago. There was about 2 hours when he couldn't find Nancy anywhere. When she finally returned, she said someone had given her a tour of the place. "I'm really sorry, man," Bill said. "I thought you should know." "Thanks, Bill," Ron replied softly. "You're a true friend." "You're welcome," Bill said. "I'd want to know if it were me. Just don't do anything rash." Ron chuckled. Rash wasn't something people often accused him of. Maybe they called him naive, but never rash. "I won't," Ron assured him. Bill finished his beer and placed a hand on Ron's shoulder as he got up. "If you need anything, let me know," Bill said before leaving. Ron nodded and took another sip of his beer. He thought about what Bill had said and started thinking about his life like it was a movie playing in his head. In many ways, Ron felt he was below average. He was the youngest of 4 kids and was often teased as the runt of the family. Standing at 5 feet 7 inches tall, he was shorter than most men in the United States and weighed about 145 pounds. He was physically weaker than most men his age. Even though he wasn't very strong, he had never heard any complaints before. With his calm nature, people often saw him as a wimp. He could count on one hand the times he had lost his temper, and even then he usually just walked away. His family took advantage of his small size and quiet nature. They liked making fun of him, calling him Little Ronnie, a name he hated. His brothers, John and George, loved to tease him. His sister Lisa, who was only a year older, often joined in but wasn't as mean. Even his parents teased him, making him feel less of a man. "Why can't you be like the other boys?" his mother June would ask when he didn't want to go out with his brothers. "Because I'm not like the other boys," he would reply. "Why can't they be more like me? Why can't they try reading a book instead of always playing sports?" The only person in his family who didn't tease him was his grandfather, Mark Black. Ron loved visiting him. Mark had a huge library. By the time Ron was 12, he had read every book in his grandfather's growing collection. His favorite story was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. He was always amazed by what people got wrong about the story. Ron also loved science books and read everything he could find. While other kids his age struggled with basic readers, he was reading War and Peace and books on biochemistry. His grandfather saw Ron's potential and paid for an IQ test. The score was incredible. With an IQ of 215, he was a genius, even smarter than Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking. Ron wasn't just smart, he was an unmeasurable genius. With Ron's test results, Mark signed him up for Mensa, even though Ron was younger than the usual age of 14. Mark and Ron celebrated with ice cream and cake when Ron was accepted. He wasn't the youngest ever, but he was still quite young. For the first time in his life, Ron felt truly happy. Mark encouraged Ron and even bought him the best computer available. Ron spent lots of time on the internet learning as much as he could. He thought learning languages would be fun, so Mark got him some software. Soon, Ron was speaking Russian, Greek, Spanish, and Latin. Just for fun, he even learned Klingon, a language from a TV show. Mark learned it with him, and they often spoke in Klingon, which confused the rest of the family. "Dad, you're spoiling the boy," Ron's father, Bob, told Mark one day. "He needs to learn practical things, not just read books all day." "The boy's gifted, Bob," Mark said. "Maybe if you spent as much time with him as you do with the other kids, you'd see that. Trust me, he's going places." Of course, all of this caused some embarrassing moments in school. One day, his teacher talked about Shakespeare. "What's your favorite line from Hamlet?" She asked Ron. "Ta pog tabe," Ron answered in perfect Klingon. Everyone stared at him, thinking he was crazy. "What?" his teacher asked. "To be or not to be," Ron said. "In Klingon, it means to live or die." "I see," the teacher said. After class, she kept him behind while the other kids laughed. She scolded him and said if it happened again, he would go to the principal's office. "I'm sorry," Ron said, looking down. "What was that anyway?" she asked. Ron showed her a copy of Hamlet translated into Klingon. She smiled when she saw it. "Please stick to the original version, okay?" she asked. "I will," he said. Ron had already read the whole play and knew it by heart. His grandfather had a big library, and Ron memorized many plays. When Ron got home, his family teased him. He rarely got mad, but this was one of those times. "Heglume kak javam," he muttered when they wouldn't stop. "What's that?" Lisa asked. "Today is a good day to die," he said angrily. Her eyes widened. His brothers backed off too. They stayed away from him for weeks. Mark kept encouraging Ron. He bought him college textbooks on chemistry and biology. Ron loved these subjects, partly because of a book by Stevenson. So Mark bought more books on these topics. Mark saw that Ron was bored in school. He passed every test without much effort. Mark used his connections to get Ron tested for a high school diploma early. It was time for a new challenge. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Williams, the superintendent, asked. "Absolutely," Mark said. "The boy is very smart and bored. He could teach these classes. He needs more of a challenge." "Okay, Mark," Dr. Williams said. "Bring the boy and I'll test him myself. If he does well, I'll help him get into college." Ron passed the test easily. He even wrote a 3-page essay for the chemistry section. "It's the most amazing thing I've seen," Dr. Williams said. "Not a single mistake." "I'm not surprised," Mark said. "I talked to the dean of admissions at MIT," Dr. Williams said. "If it's okay, I'd like to get him in. It's a great school for chemistry and biology." "Let's do it," Mark said. After some work, the dean saw Ron's records, including his IQ and test scores. Soon, Ron was on his way to MIT. Ron and Mark were thrilled, but his family wasn't impressed. "So you think you're better than us?" John asked as Ron packed. "No," Ron said. "Maybe a bit smarter, but not better." "Yeah, well, let's see what your book learning gets you," John said mockingly. George was more direct. "Remember, Squirt," George said. "You'll pay for this someday." Ron ignored him and kept packing. His parents didn't say goodbye. Lisa hugged him, though she didn't seem happy. Ron left with a tear in his eye when Mark came to pick him up. Mark planned to drive Ron to the school. "Why does my family hate me?" Ron asked Mark in the car. "They don't hate you," Mark said. "They don't understand you. They feel insecure around you." "What do you mean, Grandpa?" Ron asked. "You're very smart, Ron. That scares them. It makes them feel less. You've read many stories and books, so you should understand." "I guess so, Grandpa," Ron said. "But I wish I knew they loved me." "I love you," Mark said. "I'm very proud of you. One day you'll do great things." "Thanks, Grandpa," Ron said. "I love you too." So at 14, Ron became a student at MIT. He studied hard and read everything he could. Some students avoided him, but he made a few good friends. Mark, who was wealthy, set up a fund for Ron. It paid for his education and gave him a stipend. Ron learned about investing and started saving money. When he had enough, Ron bought himself a new car. Mark was impressed and gave him a few tips. Ron did more than just study at MIT. Inspired by Stevenson, he started his own research project. Ron believed science could solve all human problems. He wanted to help people like him who faced physical challenges. He wondered if there was a way to give them an advantage without making them dangerous or unpredictable. He often thought about this idea. even though it was just a thought for now. His online searches led him to Dr. Franklin Steiner's work. Dr. Steiner had made progress in this area. Steiner's main idea was that everyone has hidden strengths to handle tough situations. Sometimes we become a different version of ourselves, like an alter ego. For example, a usually quiet person might suddenly become loud and confident. People who knew this quiet person would be surprised by the change. Steiner explained that everyone has an inner beast that sleeps within us. His treatment could wake this beast to help someone deal with stress. Once the stress was gone, the beast would go back to sleep, and the person could return to normal life. Ron worried that this could turn someone into a destructive hide. He wanted a more lasting solution without harmful side effects. None of Steiner's work was approved by the FDA, but Steiner said he had some successful human tests. Ron was curious and promised himself that he would meet Steiner after finishing school. By 18, Ron earned his first doctorate and got his second one a year later, surprising everyone. He also earned a black belt in karate for mental focus and physical training, which he loved. His grandpa, Mark, celebrated all of Ron's achievements. Mark always attended Ron's ceremonies, but the rest of the family didn't. Ron wrote to them but stopped when they never replied. They didn't send gifts for Christmas or his birthday, but Mark always did. Ron sent his resume to many companies and had several Skype interviews. He got many job offers but chose to work at a big pharmaceutical company near home. They had a large research facility and offered the best benefits. During this time, Ron met Nancy, a waitress at a diner he liked. She was always kind to him, and he liked her a lot. It took time, but he finally asked her out, and she said yes. She wasn't his first girlfriend, but he felt different about her. At school, he had dated others, but they were just friends. Nancy was special. Nancy was amazed that someone so young could finish 2 doctorates at MIT. She saw him as someone who could help her leave her difficult life. She fell in love with the idea of being with someone successful. Ron didn't know this and also fell in love with her. He was thrilled when she accepted his marriage proposal. The large diamond ring helped convince her. Mark was happy to hear Ron's good news about the job and the wedding. "Ron, you have many things to think about," Mark said. "Nancy may be nice, but you should get a prenuptial agreement to protect yourselves." "You're right, Grandpa," Ron said. "I didn't think of that." "I'll have my lawyer prepare it," Mark offered. "Great, thanks," Ron said. Mark's lawyer made an agreement that was fair, but protected Ron's money in case of divorce. It also covered what would happen if someone was unfaithful. Ron gave the papers to Nancy. "What's this?" she asked. "It's a prenuptial agreement," Ron explained. "It protects both of us if we divorce. I'm not planning on it, but many marriages do end." "Okay," she said, signing it. Ron sent the papers back to Mark. Everything was set. Ron would graduate, marry Nancy, go to Hawaii for their honeymoon, and start his new job and life. Mark bought a nice house as a wedding gift for Ron and Nancy. Ron offered to pay, but Mark refused. He knew Ron wanted a basement for a home lab. The next few months went by quickly. Ron got his second doctorate and picked up Nancy from her sister's apartment. She didn't have much, not even a car. She used a small scooter. Ron packed everything, including the scooter, in a U-Haul and headed home. Nancy's eyes grew wide when she saw the house Mark had bought for them. She had never lived in such a nice place before. Ron felt proud. The house was cozy, with a lovely yard and a deck with a roof. Mark even bought new furniture to help them settle in. They unloaded the U-Haul and quickly put everything in its place. Ron put the scooter in the garage and promised his new wife a car after their Hawaii trip. A few days later, Ron took Nancy to meet Mark and the rest of the family at his parents' house. He hadn't heard from them in years, so he wasn't sure what to expect. Mark hugged them both and welcomed Nancy to the family. Ron's parents stood back, not saying much except to comment on how thin he was. But they did hug Nancy and welcomed her as well. "I thought I might hear from you while I was gone," Ron said. "It's been what, 4 or 5 years? I sent you my address." "Sorry," said Ron's father. "I'm not much for writing." "Not even a Christmas card?" Ron asked. "We got so busy we just forgot," his mother said. "We're not into sending cards and things. You know how it is." "Yeah, I do," Ron said. His brothers, George and John, came in. They nodded at Ron while staring at Nancy. They looked a lot like their dad, wearing worn-out clothes. Neither had shaved, and both had stubble. "Well," George said with a sly smile, "little Ron has a girlfriend." He looked closely at Nancy. "She's nice, isn't she? Have you two had fun yet, or can't you manage it?" John and their father laughed while Nancy's face turned red. Mark stepped in front of the two brothers, looking angry. "Stop it, you two," he said. "Show some respect for your brother's fiancée." He turned to Bob. "Mom would be very disappointed to see this." Bob looked down, ashamed. "Well, as always, Big Brother is defending Ron," John said. "Some things never change." "Maybe if you two took some initiative, I'd help you out, like I helped Ron and Lisa," Mark said. "But it looks like you're happy pushing a broom around." Ron looked at his two older brothers. "What?" he said, smiling. "Are you two janitors? Really? After all that talk about being football stars? Don't tell me you're still living at home." "Hey, college boy, it helps pay the bills," George said. "Where's Lisa?" Ron asked his mother. "She moved out a while back," she said. "She has her own place and is studying to be a nurse. She asked me to give you her contact info. She's still in town." She handed Ron a card with Lisa's number and address. "So I hear you got a job," Bob said to Ron. "Yeah," Ron said. "I'll be working as a researcher at a drug company." Bob nodded. "Good," Bob said. "I'm happy for you. I really am." "So, are you coming to the wedding?" Ron asked. "Or are you skipping that too?" "We'll be there," his mother said. Ron looked at his brothers, upset. "Don't forget to shower, shave, and wear clean clothes," he told them. George glared at Ron. "Remember what I told you when you left, Ron?" George said. He glanced at Nancy with a mean smile. "I never forgot," Ron said. "My memory is perfect." He signaled Nancy to leave. "It's really good to see you, Ron," his mother said as he walked out. Ron just nodded. "I'm really sorry about all that," Mark said outside. "I should have warned you. I thought they might treat you better after all this time." "I'm not sure I want them at the wedding," Ron said. "I can't have this kind of behavior there." "They're your family, Ron," Mark said. "Good or bad." "Will Lisa be like this too?" Ron asked. Mark shook his head. "No," Mark said. "She's grown up a lot since you left. I think you'll be surprised. I need to talk to the others and sort this out." He hugged Nancy. "Please forgive them," he said. After Ron and Nancy got in the car, they drove off. "Is that what you had to grow up with?" Nancy asked. Ron nodded. "Yeah, but it wasn't this bad," Ron said. "I don't know what happened." When they got home, Ron took out his phone and called Lisa. She answered after 2 rings. "Lisa, it's Ron," he said. "Ronnie," she exclaimed. "Are you home now?" "Yes, I am," he said. "I'm not far from your place. Can I come over?" she asked. "Sure," he said. "Great," Lisa said. "I'll be there soon." "You know where I live?" he asked. "Yeah, I was with Grandpa when he chose the house for you. Hope you like it," she said. "Yeah, we do," Ron said. "Good," she said. "See you in a bit." About 15 minutes later, a red Toyota pulled into the driveway. Lisa got out carrying a bag and went to the front door. Ron met her at the door and opened it. Lisa put the bag down and gave him a big hug. He hugged her back. "It's so good to see you again, Ronnie," she said. "It's good to see you too, Lisa," he said. He introduced her to Nancy, and the two women hugged. "Welcome to the family, Nancy," Lisa said. "It's great to meet you." "Same here," Nancy said. Lisa handed Ron the bag. He looked inside and found a glass dish with food. "It's a tuna casserole," Lisa said. "I know it was your favorite as a kid." "It still is," Ron said. "Thanks. It'll save us from cooking today. Please, come in and sit down." He put the casserole in the fridge. "Want something to drink? Coke? Coffee?" "Just water for me," Lisa said. "Me too," Nancy added. "Please?" "Sure," Ron replied, grabbing 3 bottles of water. He sat with his fiancée. "You look great, Lisa," Ron said. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she said. "I'm studying to be a nurse and working part-time at the hospital. I have a student loan and Grandpa helps with rent and bills, so I'm doing all right. I heard you got a good job." "Yes, I did," Ron said. "I start after our honeymoon." "I'm glad to hear that," she said, then looked thoughtful. "Have you been by the house yet?" "Yeah, we just came back from there," Ron said. "What's going on? I haven't heard from anyone in years, and now it feels like they don't care." "Things haven't been great for Mom and Dad," she said. After you left, the factory closed and Dad lost his job. He could only find a janitor job. Then the boys got hurt playing football and lost their scholarships, so they work as night janitors with Dad. After high school, Mom and Dad let them stay and turn the basement into a small apartment if they helped with house expenses, so they stayed. Is that why you left home? Ron asked. It started with that, she said. I didn't want to work as a janitor. I always wanted to be a nurse, but Dad couldn't pay for school. Grandpa helped me get a student loan and move out. You couldn't stay at home? Ron asked. She shook her head. No, she said. The boys were always mean. Sorry, she added, looking at Nancy. I've heard worse, Nancy said. Lisa continued. They fixed up the basement for the boys, Lisa said. Dad, John, and George became even meaner. Grandpa wanted to help the boys, but they only care about sports and girls. I saw Dad and the boys bringing girls to the basement a few times. The place smelled awful. I couldn't take it, so I left. And Mom let this happen? Ron asked. She wasn't happy, but after Dad yelled at her, she stopped saying anything, Lisa said. I think she's scared of losing their income if she divorced Dad. She paused, looking troubled, but didn't say more. Ron decided not to push. Then she looked at Nancy. I'm free tomorrow afternoon, she said. Want to go shopping? Maybe get what you need for the wedding? That sounds fun, Nancy said, but I don't have much money. Don't worry, Ron said. I'll give you my credit card. Just don't spend too much, okay? Both Nancy and Lisa laughed. I'll try, Nancy said, smiling. The next afternoon, they shopped for dresses and other wedding things. Nancy got her hair and nails done, and they had a nice meal. They came home late with many packages from Lisa's car. Ron was amazed at all the bags he carried and how well the girls got along, which made him happy. I'm taking you shopping for your tux tomorrow afternoon, Lisa told Ron. He was surprised. Okay, he said. The next day, she picked him up at 1 p.m. and they went to town to get his tuxedo. On the way, Lisa noticed Ron seemed nervous. What's wrong, Ron? She asked. I'm just waiting for a prank, like someone jumping out and covering me in ink, he said. She laughed. You think I'd do that? You used to before I went to college, he said. She looked away, embarrassed. Was I really that bad? She asked. Yes, he said. Not as bad as George and John, but you followed them. I never understood why you all hated me. I'm sorry, Ron, she said. I never hated you, and I'm sorry if it seemed that way. Then why? Ron asked. Why were you all so mean? I can't speak for the boys, she said. I was jealous of you and followed George and John. Now that you mention it, I was pretty mean. But that's the past. I'd like to get to know you now if that's okay. Let's make peace. So, who are you? And what happened to my sister? Why were you jealous of me? Ron asked, laughing. She laughed too. You were always so smart, she said. Grandpa always stood up for you. You spent hours reading his books. When you two started speaking Klingon, I felt left out. Do you still speak Klingon? Ron laughed. Not much, he said. But it was fun. You haven't lived until you read Shakespeare in the original Klingon, he added with a laugh, quoting a line from a Star Trek movie. They both laughed, remembering school days. After his fitting, they went for a meal and continued talking. Nancy seems really nice, Lisa said. I'm happy you found someone who loves you. Thanks, he said. What about you? Is there a Mr. Right in your life? Sort of, Lisa replied. I'm seeing someone now. Not sure where it's going, but it's good for now. I thought something else was bothering you yesterday, Ron said. Is everything okay with your family? Did something happen? Lisa looked down, her face turning a bit red. Yeah, but I'm not ready to talk about it right now, she said. I'm just glad Grandpa was there. Ron nodded. Well, if you ever want to talk, I'll be here, he said. Lisa smiled at him. Thanks, Ron, she said. I might take you up on that. The wedding went smoothly for Ron and Nancy. Her sister came from the East Coast and was maid of honor. An old high school friend was Ron's best man. Mark had the honor of walking Nancy down the aisle. When the moment came, Ron lifted her veil and kissed her as his wife for the first time. He noticed a slightly bitter taste during their kiss, but brushed it off, thinking it was just nerves. The reception mostly went well, too. Ron danced with his new bride, then with his mother and Lisa. George, John, and his father danced with Nancy as well. While they were sitting at their table, Ron's brothers approached him. "Well, Squirt, you actually did it," George said. "You really tied the knot." He looked at Nancy and snickered. "Anytime you want a real man, let me know," he said with a smirk. John smirked too. Ron wasn't amused and stood up. George noticed. "What, you gonna get tough with me, Squirt? Anytime you want to try, just let me know." "Just stay away from me," Ron said calmly, looking George in the eye, his fists clenched. George sensed a change in his brother and backed off. "Hey, just kidding, Squirt," he said, smiling. He turned to John. "Let's go," he said, and they left the reception. Just then Lisa came over and hugged her brother. "I'm really happy for you, Ron," she said. "Ignore those fools." "Thanks, Lisa," he replied. She turned to Nancy and gave her a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Nancy returned the gesture. After Lisa left, Bob and June came up to them. Bob smiled and shook Ron's hand. "You did well, son," he said. "I'm happy for you. Congratulations." "Thanks, Dad," Ron said. Bob smiled and hugged Nancy. "Welcome to the family," he told her. She hugged him back and thanked him. June hugged Ron. "I'm so happy for you two," June told him. "Congratulations." "Thanks, Mom," Ron said. She hugged and kissed Nancy, who hugged her back. Mark also gave his best wishes. "I'm so proud of you, son," he said. "You have a wonderful woman. Take good care of her." "I will, Grandpa," Ron said. "Thanks for everything." Mark hugged Nancy as well and welcomed her into the family. Ron and Nancy headed home that night. They planned to fly to Hawaii for their honeymoon early the next morning. Nancy giggled as Ron carried her over the threshold. "Oh my," she said. "So romantic. Take me to bed, husband. I need to be close to you." Ron smiled and carried his new bride upstairs, placing her on the bed. Though smaller than his brothers, he was strong. They undressed and lay down, sharing kisses. The bitter taste from earlier was gone. They kissed and touched each other, enjoying their first night together as a married couple. They made love, and then fell asleep in each other's arms. "I love you, my husband," she whispered in his ear. "And I love you, my wife," he whispered back. The next morning he woke up to Nancy kissing him. She lovingly kissed him all over. She seemed happy and pleased. Ron wondered, did something strange happen at the wedding? He decided to keep his thoughts to himself, not wanting to spoil their honeymoon. They flew to Hawaii and had a wonderful time. They enjoyed every moment together. After returning, Ron went back to work, focusing on creating new medicines. He also started building a lab at home for his own research. About 2 months after they returned from Hawaii, Nancy spoke to Ron about going to school to become a nurse. "I think that's a great idea," Ron said. "You could go to the same college as Lisa. Don't worry about the cost. Just bring me the paperwork and I'll handle it." She wrapped her arms around him and kissed him. "Oh, thank you so much," she exclaimed. "I'll go tomorrow. Lisa said registration is starting soon, so I'll sign up. I think it costs about $18,000 for a 2-year degree. Is that okay?" "Sure," Ron said. "And if you want to study further, let me know." "You're the best husband in the world," she said. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. Just wait till tonight." "I'll hold you to that," Ron said with a grin. For the next year and a half, Nancy focused on her studies. Many of her classes were at night, and she often told Ron she was studying with classmates afterward. Ron knew she had a lot to learn quickly, so he accepted her being away a lot. He also helped with cooking and house chores. While Nancy was busy, Ron worked on his own project. He had a fully equipped home lab and made good progress in his research. He tested several formulas on lab rats and felt ready to try it on himself. The formula worked. After a few days of small doses, Ron saw changes. His muscles grew by about 3%, and he felt more confident. However, these changes only lasted a few hours. Ron realized he might need higher doses or regular injections, but he had questions. Would he get addicted? Were there long-term side effects? He decided to test on rats more before injecting himself again. During this time, Ron noticed a drop in intimacy with Nancy. He knew her studies were hard, but she seemed to be out more often than at home. She didn't come home until midnight or later, and often seemed tired and irritable. When Ron mentioned their reduced time together, she got upset, saying her studies took all her time. One evening, Ron talked with Lisa, who had finished her degree and worked full-time at the hospital. "Lisa," he said, "why is Nancy out so late every night? Is the program that tough?" "Oh, yes, the program is very demanding," Lisa said. "I spent many late nights studying, too. Why do you ask? Are you worried she's doing something else?" "I don't know," Ron said. "I don't want to accuse her without reason." "Smart move," Lisa said. "I'm glad you talked to me first. Not everyone is as sharp as you." "Thanks," Ron said. "Is everything okay between you two?" she asked. "She's often short-tempered, and we hardly spend any time alone," he said. "Be patient, Ron. She's under a lot of stress and needs your support. Things will get better." "I hope you're right," Ron said. "Thanks for listening." "Anytime," Lisa said with a smile. A couple of weeks later, Ron and Nancy attended a work event. While chatting with coworkers, Ron realized Nancy was missing. He looked around for her but couldn't find her. A few hours later, she appeared. Relieved, he went to her. "Where were you? I was worried." "Your coworkers gave me a tour. It's impressive here," she said. That night at home, she was very affectionate. Ron enjoyed their time together but noticed a strange taste in her mouth. He also noticed she was different from normal. His suspicions grew. 2 weeks later, Ron received the bad news from a friend. Ron was heartbroken and questioned how many others there might have been. He called his grandfather, Mark, for advice. "Hey, son, what's wrong?" Mark answered. "Grandpa, I think Nancy's cheating," Ron said. "Come over, let's talk," Mark said. Ron went to his grandfather's house. Mark listened to everything Ron had to say. "What do I do, Grandpa? I don't know where to start." "Use your head, Ron. First, we need evidence for court. Then you can see a lawyer and file for divorce. Do you still have the prenuptial agreement?" "Yes," Ron said. Mark nodded. "The court might require counseling. Do you think you can forgive her?" Mark asked. "I don't think so, Grandpa. She's been so unpleasant lately and is out almost every night until late." "Maybe we should hire a private investigator to watch her," Mark suggested. "I know a few good ones. Do you have an extra house key?" Ron handed Mark an extra key from his keychain. "We need to set up cameras and microphones in the house, just in case she does something when she's home. When does she usually leave for her classes?" "Her first class starts at 11:30 a.m. this semester," Ron said. "She has a full schedule and stays at school until about 9:30 p.m. She then studies late into the night. That's what Lisa told me, and it seems normal for the courses she's taking." Mark sighed. "We'll know the truth soon. Meanwhile, stay calm and act normal around her. Don't confront her or accuse her until we have proof. And don't do anything foolish." "I won't," Ron promised. "I'm glad you're talking to Lisa," Mark said. "You should spend more time with her. She's matured a lot since she left home." "Did something happen to her at home?" Ron asked. "Yes," Mark replied. "But I don't know all the details. Don't push her. She'll tell you when she's ready." "Okay, I understand," Ron said. Mark gave Ron a hug. "Now go home and act normal around Nancy," Mark advised. "I'll call you and update you on our plan. I'm really sorry to hear about this. I thought Nancy was a wonderful girl. It's hard to believe she would do something like this. Don't worry. Whatever happens, we will get through it together." "Thanks, Grandpa," Ron said before leaving. When he got home, he noticed Nancy was still out. That wasn't unusual these days. He had an idea and grabbed a small webcam from his tech supplies. He installed it in their bedroom, thinking it might catch something if it happened there. The camera was tiny and motion-activated, so he hoped Nancy wouldn't notice it. He went down to his lab to check the camera and then worked on his personal project to keep distracted. After checking on his test rats, he saw that the latest version of his formula lasted longer than the others. There were no bad side effects either. He did some calculations and decided to test it on himself once more. He knew it was risky, but he felt it was necessary. He recorded his heart rate, breathing, oxygen levels, and blood pressure, then gave himself a small dose of the drug. After about 45 minutes, he felt the familiar warmth that showed it was working. He checked his vitals again, and they were still normal. He went to the back of his lab where he kept his workout gear. He changed into shorts and a t-shirt, then started punching the bag. After a while, he realized his strength and stamina were much better. His muscles looked bigger, too. He measured his arms, legs, and chest and saw a clear improvement. Pleased with the results, He wondered how long the effects would last. He went through his karate routine faster and stronger than ever. After an hour, he checked his vitals again and was happy with the results. Maybe he had finally found the right formula. But he didn't want to rush things. He took a quick shower and locked the lab before heading back upstairs. He thought Nancy would be home in about half an hour. Surprisingly, she arrived 15 minutes earlier than usual. "Hey there," he said when she walked in. "Good to see you home early for once." He hugged her warmly. "If this is how you greet me for coming home early, I'll do it more often," she said, surprised. "What brought this on?" "I just missed you," he said. "How was school?" "It was fine," she replied. "Mostly reviews. We have tests coming up." "How about we review something else?" he suggested. "Like what?" she asked. She squealed as he picked her up easily. Wow, Ron thought. Either she lost weight or he was stronger. "Like our first night together," he said, carrying her upstairs. "You mean—" she began. "Yes," he replied. "I want you right now." She smiled and hugged him. "Lead on," she said. He took her to the bedroom and set her on the bed before starting to undress. "I want to see you," he said. Nancy started undressing playfully. "Think you can handle this?" she teased. "Oh, yeah," he said. After they undressed, she looked at him. "What's gotten into you?" she asked. "You seem different." "I've been working out," he said, "and I just want to be close to you." He looked at himself and noticed that the formula seemed to have an even greater effect than he thought. He was stronger, and everything seemed better. He smiled at Nancy, feeling optimistic about what was to come, both in his personal life and his experiments. Ron and Nancy were in bed together. "Be close to me," she whispered. Ron moved closer to her. He noticed everything felt different this time. Nancy took a deep breath as Ron moved gently. "You feel amazing," she said softly. "Don't stop." Nancy made happy sounds as Ron kept moving. Soon he felt he couldn't hold back much longer. "I'm almost there, Nancy," he said, pushing a bit deeper. "Yes, please," she replied. "I want to feel all of you." They reached a peak together, holding each other tight. It was the strongest feeling he had ever felt. When they finally stopped, both were breathing hard. Nancy looked at Ron with wide eyes. "That was incredible," she said. Ron kissed her deeply. "It really was," he agreed, lying next to her. Nancy got up and noticed Ron's excitement had not yet gone away. She began to play with him gently. "I still want more," she said. She sat on him and moved in a steady rhythm. Ron felt even more excited and matched her movements, making them both happy. They soon found themselves reaching another high. Ron saw their shared connection, and it excited him even more. He placed her on her back so he could see her better. "Do you want more?" she asked. "Yes," said Ron, moving softly but firmly. "Then don't hold back," she replied with a grin. They continued sharing every moment intensely. When they reached another high, Ron was certain they had connected deeply. He asked her for more intimacy, and she agreed. She seemed a bit surprised, but went with it. "That's it," Ron said. "Keep going." She focused on making him happy, though it wasn't easy. "Perfect," he said. Just like that. She tried her best to please him and eventually made him feel great again. "Now enjoy it," he said. "All of it." She did as he asked and looked up to see him smiling. "That was the best," he told her. As he lay down next to her, she looked thoughtful. Ron had never been this focused in bed before. She wondered if he knew about her choices outside their marriage. He hugged her tightly. She put her arm around him, noticing how strong he felt. "Are you sure you didn't take anything?" she asked. "You seem different." "Just diet and exercise," he said. "We haven't been this close for a while, so I guess I seem new to you." "When was the last time we were together like this?" "Like this?" she asked. "Honestly, I don't remember, but I'm not complaining." "I'm glad," he said. Maybe he thought this will make her think and stay. At the very least, it's something new for her. "You know, you're the only one I want." He sensed she felt guilty. "And you're the only one I want," she said. "Really?" he asked. She looked a bit worried. "Of course, Ron," she said. "I love you. Only you." "I'm happy to hear that," he said. "I love you too. It would hurt me if that ever changed." She held him even closer. "It would hurt me too," she whispered. Ron kissed her forehead. Let's take a weekend to ourselves, he suggested. A chance to reconnect. I'd like that, she said. Maybe after my exams. I need some time to study. I understand, he said. If you need help, just ask. Thanks, baby, she said. I will. I think we need some sleep, he said. I have to get to work early. Sounds good, she said. Good night. I love you. Good night, sweetie, he replied. I love you too. They soon fell asleep. In the morning, Ron woke up to Nancy's touch. Good morning, love, she said, moving away slightly. Good morning, beautiful, he replied. Please, keep going. She continued until he felt joy again. Nancy smiled and showed her enjoyment, then swallowed. Wow, Ron said with a smile. What can I say? She responded. I need my morning energy. They kissed, and Ron got ready for work. Nancy put on her robe and went downstairs to make coffee and breakfast. They ate together, feeling close like when they first got married. Ron hoped this would be how things were from now on. After Ron ate, he told his wife her cooking was great, gave her a hug, and left the house. I love you, he said. I love you too, she replied. I might be home late tonight. I have a lot to study. I get it. Just don't stay out too late, he said with a smile. She smiled back. I'll try, she said. That afternoon, Ron got a text from Mark. Wired and ready, PI on the case. Got it, Ron texted back. After a productive day at work, Ron went home and checked his computer to see if his webcam had recorded anything. It had recorded the night before when he was with his wife and also when Nancy went to the bathroom. It even recorded his morning routine and him getting ready for work. He fast-forwarded through all that, hoping there wouldn't be anything more. He thought the only things the camera should have recorded were Nancy getting ready for school and changing the sheets on the bed. But the camera picked up something else. About 30 minutes after Ron left, the camera recorded Nancy coming into the room, followed by his father and 2 brothers. What were they doing there, he thought. Nancy sat on the bed and the 3 men took off their clothes. I can't do this today, guys, she said in the video. Why not? George asked. Things have changed, she said. What do you mean? John asked. I think Ron suspects something, she said. Like what? Bob asked. You didn't see him last night, she said. He was a completely different person. Did you sleep with him last night? John asked. Didn't we tell you not to let him near you during the week? I had no choice, she said. He just took me. And honestly, it was the best we've ever had. I'm still a bit sore. What do you mean, took you? And you let him? George asked angrily. Bob raised his hand. Hold on, he said. What do you mean by different, Nancy? He was kinder, stronger, and more confident, even better in bed. I thought maybe he took something, but he said it was just diet and exercise. He's up to something in his lab, Bob said. We need to find out. No, you can't do that, Nancy said. He has many security measures, and if anyone tries to break in, it alerts him and the police. Do you know what he's working on? George asked. Nancy shook her head. No idea, she said. So what? We forget our plan to make him raise a child that isn't his? John asked. I think we should pause that plan, she said. I want to finish school and start working first. Once I have a stable job, we can think about it again. No way, George said. I don't want to wait that long. He looked at his father. Maybe we should go with Plan B. Bob nodded. Nancy looked at them, confused. What do you mean, Plan B? She asked. If we can't trick him, we'll ruin him another way, John said. We'll get it all on tape and make sure everyone sees it, George added. They laughed. You can't be serious, Nancy said. Oh, we're serious, John said, and you'll help us set him up. What? Nancy asked. You want me to set him up? Yes, George said, but we won't do it ourselves. We know some guys who will, and yes, you will help us. What if I refuse? She asked. Then we'll tell him about your wedding day, John said. How our stuff was dripping down your leg during your vows, and show him the video proof. You think he'll want to be with you after that? Nancy looked down, ashamed. What about your grandfather? Nancy asked. He won't let you get away with this. He might kick us out or worse, George said. But don't worry about him, Bob said. George and John nodded. So, are you in, or do we need to make things worse for you? John asked. Just don't hurt him, please, she cried. When do you want to do this? Soon, George said. We'll let you know. In the meantime, act normal. Got it? Nancy nodded, tears rolling down her face. I got it, she said softly. Good, George said. Now get to work. She hesitated but followed their orders. Ron felt sick watching this. Once the men were done, they got dressed and left. On the way out, John turned to Nancy. Remember what we talked about, he said. Don't let him come around during the week if you know what's good for you. Nancy was finally left alone, and as Ron watched, she buried her head in her hands and cried. The video stopped as she got up and went to the bathroom. Ron copied it to a thumb drive. Realizing he had just seen a crime being planned, he picked up his phone to call the police and warn Mark. He never got to call because his phone rang first. It was Lisa. Ron, thank God I reached you, she said. You need to get to the hospital right now. What's wrong, Lisa? Ron asked. It's Grandpa, she said. He was shot. He's out of surgery, but it's really bad. Please hurry. I'll meet you in the ER. They ended the call. Ron rushed out, locking the lab doors behind him. He drove quickly to the hospital and met Lisa in the emergency room. She grabbed his hand and led him to where Mark was. Mark's eyes were closed, and he was breathing unevenly. Tubes and wires were attached to him, and his vital signs looked bad. What happened? Ron asked Lisa. The police said he got caught in a drive-by shooting between two gangs, she said. He was hit several times. It doesn't look good at all. Ron nodded and watched the monitors. He sat next to Mark and Lisa, who leaned on his shoulder, crying. He put his arm around her to comfort her. Suddenly, Mark jerked in his bed. Ron and Lisa saw the signs of a heart attack. An announcement for a code blue filled the room with medical staff. Ron and Lisa stepped aside as they tried to save Mark, but it was no use. They watched as Mark's vitals flatlined and nothing more could be done. A doctor recorded the time of Mark's death in his file and removed the medical equipment. They covered Mark with a sheet before leaving. Ron knelt by Mark, tears streaming down his face. Lisa cried with him, touching his shoulder. As Ron cried for his grandfather, anger started to build inside him. He felt his body shake and was filled with rage. It grew until he couldn't hold it in. Suddenly, he threw his head back and let out a loud, painful yell. Lisa stepped back, shocked. A few nurses rushed over, but by then Ron had calmed down. I need to get out of here, Ron said. I'll call tomorrow. Please do, Lisa said, worried. She had never seen him like this and was very concerned. Ron left and headed for the exit. Outside, he met his dad and brothers. What happened? Bob asked. Ron grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against a truck, hatred in his eyes. As if you don't know? Ron said. Bob looked scared. He had never seen Ron this way before. No, I don't, he said. I swear I don't. If I find out you had anything to do with Grandpa being shot, so help me, I'll make you pay, Ron growled. Bob looked at his son, frightened. No, please, Ron, believe me, I didn't, he begged. Ron released him and saw George start to move toward him. He swiftly knocked him down with a kick. Ron turned to John, fury in his eyes. Do you want some of this too? Ron asked. John shook his head with wide eyes and held up his hands. No, Ron, please, no more, he said. Then stay away from me, Ron said. He looked down at Bob. Are you handling Grandpa's funeral, or do I have to do it? I'll take care of it, Bob said, standing up. I'm sorry, Ron. Really, I am. I know how much your grandfather meant to you. I'll handle it. You better, Ron said before walking off. He called his boss to request time off. I'm so sorry, Ron, his boss said. Take the next 5 days off. We've got it covered. Thanks, boss, Ron said, ending the call. He got in his car and drove home, thinking about his revenge. He swore they would all pay for what they did. As he drove, his mind worked on formulas and calculations while he focused on the road. His face twisted into an evil grin as a plan formed. Yes, he thought, they would all pay. When he got home, he turned off all cameras, then went to his lab, mind full of ideas. He worked urgently, checking past experiments and his large library of information, making adjustments as needed. The first attempt had to work. There was no time for tests. He worked as if possessed, until he finally created what he needed. He found one more thing to help him and set it aside. He grabbed something that looked like a turkey baster, filled it with his new solution, and set it aside. Now he had to wait. He didn't wait long as he heard Nancy's car arrive in the garage. He grabbed what he needed and ran up the stairs to the kitchen. He poured Nancy a glass of sherry, knowing she liked one before bed. He turned around, holding the glass, just as Nancy came in from the garage. "Is that for me?" she asked, reaching for the glass. "Of course," he said, giving it to her. "How was your day?" "Busy as heck," she sighed and took a sip. "We were going over everything for the—" She dropped the glass as the drug took effect and almost fell, but Ron caught her in time. He picked her up and carried her upstairs, laying her on the bed. He undressed her and noticed marks on her chest, thinking some bad thoughts about her. He didn't find any other signs, assuming she had been careful. He put a pillow under her, lifting her enough to do what he needed. After making her comfortable, he went downstairs and got a baster and some towels. Back in the bedroom, he carefully used the baster, making sure to catch any spills with the towels. He watched as the liquid went inside her and kept adding more until it was all in. He cleaned her up and checked his watch, satisfied. The drug would keep her asleep for about 8 hours, and the solution would be absorbed in 6. Perfect. He went to his lab and slept on a futon. He woke at 6:30 the next morning, showered, dressed, and had some coffee. He had a busy day ahead. He took his laptop and a thumb drive with yesterday's video, left a note for Nancy, and turned the cameras back on. He told her he had to start his day early but said nothing about Mark's death. On the way, he called his sister Lisa. "Hey, sis," he said. "Can I come over and make us some breakfast?" "Sure," she said. "Feeling better today?" "Yeah, a bit," he said. "Got some sleep last night, which helped." "Good," she said. "See you soon." A little later, Lisa let Ron into her apartment. She showed him the kitchen, and he started cracking eggs to make an omelet. "You sure you can handle this?" she asked. "Oh, yeah," he said. "I'll make some coffee," she said. "Sounds good to me," he told her. "So what's this about?" Lisa asked when Ron served the omelets. "I have something to show you," Ron said, pulling out his laptop and thumb drive. He got it ready, handed her headphones, and started the video. Her eyes widened as she watched. When it ended, she took off the headphones, wiping tears from her eyes. "Oh my God," she said. "I can't believe they did that to you. Do you think Dad had anything to do with Grandpa getting shot?" "I thought so at first, but the timeline just didn't fit," he said. "There wasn't enough time for him to set it up." "I heard you got into a fight with them in the parking lot," she said. "Yeah, a bit," Ron said. "Is Dad handling Grandpa's funeral?" She nodded. "He said he would," she told him. Ron looked at his sister for a moment before speaking. "I need to know the truth, Lisa," he said. "The whole truth." "About what?" she asked. "What made you leave home?" he asked. "Were you hurt?" She started crying and couldn't look at Ron. "You can tell me. I'll be here for you." She cried on his shoulder, and when she calmed down, she spoke. "You remember how we used to play in the basement?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "I always ended up at the bottom of the pile." She laughed a little. "After you left, it was me at the bottom," she said. "A year after you left, the boys and I were in the basement. Mom and Dad were out, and the boys had some beer. They gave me one, and the next thing I knew, I was sitting in George's lap with John in front of me. I felt strange, like I wanted it but hated it at the same time. Later, I realized I had been drugged." "How many times after that did it happen?" Ron asked. "A lot. Once every other week for about a year and a half," she said. "I felt so ashamed." "Damn, why didn't you just say no?" he asked. "I did at first, but John said he had pictures and videos and threatened to ruin me," she said. "They also threatened to hurt me if I went to the police." "Was Dad involved?" Ron asked. "Not at first," she said. "Later, he would come to the basement and watch. He got involved a couple of times." "And they all threatened you?" he asked. "Yes, even Dad," she said. "I couldn't take it anymore. I told Grandpa I had to leave, but I never told him the whole truth." "Did Mom know?" Ron asked. She shook her head. "No. She knew about the other girls, but not this," she said. "She was never around when it happened, and Dad told me never to mention it to her." "Oh my God, Lisa, that's awful," Ron said. "I think you should talk to someone. You might have a case." "You think anyone will care after all these years?" she asked. "I'm seeing an attorney today. I'll ask about it," Ron said. "I thought I had read somewhere that there's no time limit for crimes like this in our state, but I'm not too sure about the laws. And yes, it was a crime. "Are you going to leave Nancy?" Lisa asked. "Yes," he said. "I can't stay with her after this." "Good," she said. "I feel really bad for you, Ron. There are lots of nice girls out there who would be lucky to have a man like you, and I'm really sorry for how I treated you when we were kids. I know we were just young, but there's no excuse for what I did." Ron smiled and hugged his sister. "That's okay," he said. "Thanks for saying sorry, and I accept it. I have a lot to do today, so I better get going. Call me if you need anything, and I'll let you know what I find out, okay?" "Sounds good," she said. "Thanks for coming over, Ron. And thanks for making breakfast. I might ask you to do it again." He smiled and kissed her on the cheek. "Anytime," he said. Just then, Ron's phone buzzed. He didn't recognize the number, but answered it anyway. "Ron Black," he said. "Mr. Black, this is Marcus Billingham, your grandfather's lawyer," a man said on the other end. "Is this a good time to talk?" "Yes, it is," Ron said. "What can I do for you?" "I'm sorry to tell you, but your grandfather passed away yesterday," Marcus said. "First, I'd like to offer my condolences. He and I were friends for a long time." "Thank you, Mr. Billingham," Ron said. "Please call me Marcus," he said. "Second, I need to talk to you and your sister about your grandfather's will. Can you both come to my office this morning?" "I can come by," Ron said. "Let me ask Lisa. She's right here." He put the phone down and looked at his sister. "Can you take today off and come see Grandpa's lawyer?" "I think so," she said. "We get 3 days off when someone in the family dies, so it shouldn't be a problem. Let me call work first." She pulled out her phone and called her boss. A minute later, she ended her call and looked at Ron. "No problem," she said. "I can be there." Ron put his phone on speaker. "Marcus, my phone is on speaker," Ron said. "Lisa can come with me. What time do you want us to be there?" "Can you make it by 10 a.m.? he asked. Lisa nodded her head. "We'll be there," Ron said. "Good," Marcus said. "I'll see you at 10 o'clock." They ended the call after Marcus gave his address, and Lisa ran to her room to get ready. Soon, they were on their way to Marcus's downtown office. Ron found a spot in the main parking garage, and they walked 2 blocks to Marcus's office. The receptionist took their names and led them to Marcus's office. "Please come in," Marcus said as the receptionist opened the door. He shook their hands and offered them coffee. They accepted, and 3 cups were brought in. Marcus invited them to sit down. "You're probably wondering why I called you both here today," he said. "I am a bit curious," Ron said, "especially since I was going to call for some family law advice." "Are you looking to get a divorce?" Marcus asked. Ron nodded. "Yes," he said. "Well, we can handle that too," Marcus said. "I actually wrote the prenuptial agreement for you and Nancy at your grandfather's request. I hope you don't mind, but he told me you might need our help just before he was injured. We'll get to that later. What I really wanted to talk about are some important changes in your grandfather's will." "Oh?" Ron asked. "What changes?" "About 8 months ago, your grandfather basically wrote your father and brothers out of his will," Marcus said. "He left each of them $1. Your father was the executor of his will, but he changed that. You, Ron, are now the executor. His entire estate is in a trust with you and Lisa as the officers in charge, with equal power." Ron and Lisa looked at each other, shocked. This was the first they had heard about these changes, and their grandfather had never mentioned anything about their father and brothers being left out. "Normally, this wouldn't be a big deal, but your grandfather's estate is very large," Marcus said. "Maybe not as big as Bill Gates, but still significant. After my fees and his final expenses, you two will be set for life. If you want, I can handle everything with the probate court, but you will still need to make the final decisions. Don't worry about my fees. Your grandfather already covered them." "Do you think our father might contest this?" Ron asked. Marcus nodded. "I would be surprised if he didn't," Marcus said. "Well, Grandpa trusted you for a long time," Ron said. "So I'm okay with you handling the probate stuff. How about you, Lisa?" She nodded. "Yes, sure," she said. "Good. Just so you know, there are 4 properties in the trust," Marcus said. "Your grandfather's home, the one you and Nancy live in, Ron, the home your parents now live in, and a piece of lakefront property." "Wait," Ron said. "The house Mom and Dad live in is part of the trust? I thought Grandpa just held the note on that." "No," Marcus said. He bought the mortgage a few years ago when your father lost his job. There is no note on it now. He let your parents and brothers stay there for minimal rent. If you want, you can keep that arrangement. That's up to you. And what's this lakefront property? Ron asked. I didn't know anything about that. Your grandfather talked about using it as a summer home, Marcus said. He started building it a few months ago, but it's not finished. Maybe you and your family can work on it together and make a nice place for vacations. They talked about Mark's will for about another half hour before the talk shifted to Ron and Lisa. Marcus, Ron said, we need your advice on something. He turned to his sister. Do you want to tell him? Lisa nodded and started talking. She felt embarrassed, and Ron was getting more upset as she spoke. Marcus listened quietly, writing notes. When Lisa finished, he leaned back and thought for a minute before speaking. Lisa, he said, this state has no time limit for what you've just described. The problem will be proving it. Did they say they had a video? She nodded. Yes, that's what they told me, she said. Marcus nodded. Okay, he said. I'll call the district attorney and see what he thinks. Someone from his office will likely want to talk to you before taking any steps. Is that all right? Yes, she said. I want them to pay for what they did. Did your mother know anything about this? Marcus asked. No, not as far as I know, Lisa said. All right, he said. I can't promise anything, but I'll talk to the DA and see what we can do, okay? Thank you, Lisa said. Marcus then turned to Ron, who had pulled a thumb drive from his pocket. And you? Marcus asked. Ron handed it to him. I want a divorce, Ron said. This has a video of her with my father and my brothers. Grandpa also hired a private investigator. We're going to see him next. Marcus put the drive into his computer and played the video. His face turned a bit red as he watched. When it was over, he removed the drive. Mind if I keep this for a while? He asked Ron. Not at all, Ron replied. Good. I'll mention this to the district attorney too, if you don't mind, Marcus said. I'll start the paperwork right away based on the prenuptial agreement. When do you plan to talk to her about this? Tonight, when she gets home from school, Ron said. All right, Marcus said. From what I see, it looks like a clear case. Adultery is still grounds for divorce in this state, and it can even be a crime, though it's rare. Your agreement says that in case of adultery, the guilty spouse gets no support. Your house is owned by your grandfather's trust, so she can't claim that. Does she have a job? No, she's a full-time student, Ron said. I plan to set her up with an apartment until she finishes school. I've already paid her tuition through the end of her program. According to the agreement, she gets $2,500 for each year we were married, plus whatever money she had when we got married, which was $450. I'll give her a check for that tonight. She has her own car, so that's hers. I see, Marcus said. You're being very kind under the circumstances. I hate what she did, but I don't want her to have nowhere to go, Ron said. That's good to hear, Marcus said. All right, I'll get the paperwork started. I'll also get a restraining order against her and the other three. Make sure I have her new address so I can serve her. If you get more evidence, let me know. Unless she fights it, the divorce should be final in 6 months. Thanks, Ron said. How much do I need for a retainer? Don't worry about that now, Marcus said. I'll send you a bill. Your grandfather already gave me a big retainer, so I'll use that for now. Marcus gave them his business card, then stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Ron and Lisa stood, and they shook hands. I'm really sorry about everything, Marcus said. Your grandfather thought the world of you two. He hoped the family would come back together. If you need anything, call me any time. I'll talk to the DA and let you know what I find out. Thank you, Marcus, Ron said. Their next stop was the office of Alfred Johnson, the private investigator Mark hired. After speaking with the receptionist, a redhead with a bit of an attitude, they were shown into Alfred's office. A middle-aged man chewing a cigar greeted them. Please call me Al, he said after the introductions. I talked with your grandfather and we've been looking into your wife. She's been quite busy. I haven't finished my report, but I have lots of pictures and video. What have you found out? Ron asked. Your wife has been with several men in just the last day, Al said. I'd say she's been with at least 15 men, including your father and brothers. 15? Ron asked, shocked. Yep, Al said. He handed Ron a manila folder full of pictures and a DVD. That's since we started. I can tell you that your father and brothers were at your house this morning. They came at about 8:30 and left about 10 o'clock. We've got video of that, too, on the DVD. I have to warn you, though, it's pretty upsetting and very detailed. Ron did some quick thinking. If they left by 10 a.m., things should happen around 3 p.m. Thanks, Ron said. I think we have enough proof for the divorce. I've already started the process. After tonight, we can call it done if you want. Okay, Al said. I'll have my guys watch her until tonight and we'll end the surveillance. I can have a full report ready for you in about 3 days. Does that work? Yes, it does, Ron said. How much do I need to pay you? I'll figure that out when we're done and send you a bill, Al said. Your grandfather already paid for a week of surveillance, so there might be some money back. My grandfather was shot and killed yesterday, Ron said. So any refund can come to me? I'm very sorry to hear that, Al said. Mark was a great guy. He helped me get started. I'll figure everything out and get in touch with you. That's fine, Ron said, giving Al a card with his contact details. We'll be in touch, Al said before they left. And let me know about the funeral. I'd like to attend. After that, Ron and Lisa went to lunch and talked about the morning. I knew Grandpa had a lot of money, but I didn't know he was that rich, Lisa said. Same here, Ron said. It's hard to believe. So, what's next? Lisa asked. I saw online that your apartment complex has small furnished studios for rent, Ron said. I'd like to get one for Nancy. Do you mind her living in the same complex as you? No, I don't mind, she said. You're really doing this, aren't you? Kicking her out. Yeah, Ron said. I don't trust her anymore, and whatever love I had is gone. You've changed, Ron, she said. A lot. The Ron I knew as a kid would have let her cheat on him and done nothing about it. He wouldn't have fought his brother either. What's changed? That Ron is gone, he said, and I'm done letting people walk all over me. He realized she was right. The old Ron wouldn't have kicked Nancy out. Even if he thought about it, he would have felt guilty. The new Ron felt no guilt or sadness about it, or about what might happen to his father and brothers. The old Ron would have been heartbroken over the divorce. He might even have begged Nancy to come back, letting her treat him poorly, but that Ron was gone, replaced by someone stronger. He knew he had to be careful not to become too harsh, though, or he could become like Stevenson's character, Edward Hyde. I like this new Ron, Lisa said with a smile. He smiled back. Thanks, he said. Me too. What about Mom? She asked. If Dad and the boys end up in jail, she won't have any income. Even if they don't, there's the house. Are you thinking of throwing them out? It's tempting, he said. They've given me plenty of reasons to, but I don't want Mom to suffer. She can stay if they go to jail. Let's see what happens. Okay, she said. Would you set up a small trust fund for her? I think I would, he said. Grandpa would have done the same. You're probably right, she said. After they ate, they went back to Lisa's apartment and then to the office. Lisa introduced Ron to the office manager and explained the situation. So you want to rent a studio apartment for your soon-to-be ex-wife? Asked Marcia, the office manager. Yes, Ron said. And I'll pay for 6 months' rent in advance if I can. 6 months? Marcia asked. That's very generous. Yes, we can do that. We have a furnished studio available now if that works for you. It does, Ron said. Marcia took them to see the apartment. It was small but clean and had all the basic furniture. Ron thought it would be enough for Nancy, who would be busy with school. I'll take it, Ron said. They went back to the office, where Ron filled out the paperwork. He wrote a check for the deposit and 6 months' rent and got the keys from Marcia. When do you think she'll move in? Marcia asked. Tonight, Ron said. After she gets back from school. They walked back to Lisa's apartment. When they got there, she turned to him. Are you sure about this? Lisa asked. Yes, Ron said. The sooner she's gone, the better. I hope you're doing the right thing, she said. It's the only thing I can do, he said. At least I'm not making her live in her car, though I thought about it. I understand, she said. Can I keep in touch with her to make sure she's all right? I don't care, Ron said. She'll need a job soon. Maybe you can help her with that. I'll see what I can do, Lisa said. Talk to you soon, okay? He nodded. Lisa hugged him. It'll be all right, little brother. You'll see. Thanks, Lisa, he said. "I appreciate it." Then he left and went to the bank to make some changes to his account. He took Nancy off their joint bank account, paid off and canceled their joint credit card, then got a new card just in his name. He also got a cashier's check for $5,450 made out to Nancy. It was a costly day, but he knew it had to be done. After that, he went home and started packing her clothes and toiletries. He put most of them in trash bags and set them in the garage next to her scooter, which she still used sometimes. He took down all the photos of them together and put them in boxes, along with their wedding album. While he was packing Nancy's things, his phone rang. He saw it was Marcus calling, so he answered. "Ron," Marcus said, "just wanted to let you know I spoke with the district attorney. He's very interested in the cases about you and Lisa." "Great," Ron said. "Is there anything we need to do?" "Not yet," Marcus replied. "I think he'll contact you both soon to set up an interview. I just wanted to let you know." "Thanks a lot, Marcus," Ron said. They ended the call and Ron kept packing until he felt he had done enough. By then, it was almost 3 p.m., and he knew things would start to get interesting soon. He went down to his lab and checked the video from earlier that morning. Sure enough, at around 8:30, according to the timestamp, Nancy was joined in the bedroom by his father, John, and George. George had a large bruise on his face where Ron had kicked him the day before. "What happened to you?" Nancy asked. "Your useless husband did this to me yesterday at the hospital," George said. "You never told me he learned martial arts." "Sorry," she said. "I guess I forgot to mention it. He started in college." "Well, he's going to pay for it, I promise you," George said. "What are you planning to do?" she asked. He pulled a gun from his belt and showed it to her. "After my friends deal with him, I'm going to shoot him," George said. Nancy shook her head. "No, please, you promised you wouldn't hurt him," she said. "I never promised anything," he replied. "Let's see if he's faster than a bullet." "You'll end up in jail," she said. "So what?" George growled. "He owes me and he's gonna pay." "What were you doing at the hospital?" she asked. "Dad was shot yesterday," Bob said. "He died after surgery." "Oh my God," Nancy said. "Ron didn't tell me about that last night. Did you plan it?" "No," Bob said. "It was just bad luck. He got caught between two gangs shooting at each other." "Bad luck indeed," John said. "Still, it works out for us. Now we'll get the house and a good amount of inheritance money." Ron laughed to himself. "Sure you will," he thought. "Now get ready," George ordered. Nancy undressed and the men assaulted her. Ron fast-forwarded through this part, not wanting to watch. His face showed a wicked grin. "Just wait, jerks," he thought. "The fun hasn't even started." After they finished and got dressed, Nancy turned to George. "So when will your friends take Ron?" she asked. "Probably tomorrow afternoon after you leave for school. They're going to follow him in their van and grab him when they can," George said. "We know a spot by the lake. They'll deal with him, and then I'll shoot him between the eyes. After that, we'll dump his body in the lake to become fish food." "I wish you wouldn't do it," she said. "It's going to happen, and there's nothing you or anyone else can do about it," John said. "Now don't get brave. Don't say anything to anyone about it, you hear? Otherwise, we'll tell the cops it was all your idea." Nancy nodded. Ron saw she wasn't okay with any of this. They left the room and Nancy started crying. After several minutes, she went to the bathroom to clean up for school. When the video ended, Ron checked his vitals and body measurements. He was glad to see there was almost no change from the last time he checked. He decided not to give himself any more of his mixture until the morning when he might need it. Just then, his phone rang. It was his mother. He answered, knowing what she was going to say. "Ron, you need to come to the hospital," she said. "They're taking Dad and the guys in." "For what?" he asked. "Something's wrong with their bodies," she said. "Bodies?" Ron asked. "What bodies?" "You know, their private parts," she said. "What did they do, try to touch an electric socket?" he asked. "Don't be sarcastic, Ron," she said. "They're in pain. Their parts have turned black. I had to call 911 and an ambulance came. I also called Lisa and she's on her way there too. Please, can you meet me at the hospital?" "Okay, give me a couple of minutes. I have something to do first," he said. "Thanks, Ron," she said before hanging up. Ron looked up a number in his phone book and dialed it. Police department, homicide, said the woman who answered. Yes, I'd like to speak to someone about a plot to commit assault and murder, Ron said. One moment, please, the woman said. After a minute of hold music, a man's voice came on the line. Homicide, Detective Sparks, the man said. Detective, my name is Ron Black, and I'd like to report a plot to commit assault and murder, Ron said. Tell me what you know, sir, Detective Sparks said. Ron quickly explained the situation and shared everything his brothers had told him. Do you know where they are now? Detective Sparks asked once Ron finished. They're on their way to the hospital, Ron replied. They might even be in surgery right now. Why are they in the hospital? The detective asked. Something happened to their private parts, Ron said. My mom told me on the phone they might have to cut them off. Got it, Detective Sparks said. I'm heading there now, Ron said. Can you or one of your officers meet me there? I have a video of them planning this, and I can give you a copy. Sure, the detective said. We'll see you there. Ron hung up, laughed a bit, and copied the video onto a thumb drive. After locking everything up, he went to the hospital with his laptop and the thumb drive. He found a parking spot and went to the emergency room. Inside, he asked the person at the front desk and was directed to where the three men were in surgery. He saw Lisa and his mom talking to a man in a cheap suit. An officer was with them. Hi, Mom, Ron said as he walked up to them. How are Dad and the boys? Not good, she said, crying. They're in surgery now. The doctor said they have to cut off their private parts. Ron said. Sorry to hear that. The man in the suit looked at Ron. Are you Ron Black? He asked. Ron nodded. Yes, I am, Ron said. And you must be Detective Sparks. Yes, the detective said. He pointed to some chairs. Want to talk about this? Sure, Ron said. His mom spoke up. What's this all about, Ron? She asked. What's going on? Well, Mom, since this affects you too, you should know, Ron said. He waved for Lisa to join them. After they sat down, Ron pulled out his laptop and plugged in the thumb drive. June and Lisa gasped as they saw Nancy with the three men. Okay, Ron said, listen to this. He played the video so everyone could hear it. He skipped through the inappropriate parts to show the end, but June saw enough to understand. Her eyes widened. Ron played the part where George and John explained the plan. When it was done, he pulled out the drive and handed it to Detective Sparks. Do you know who helped them? Detective Sparks asked. No, sir, I don't, Ron said. It could be someone they work with or someone they hang out with. Sparks looked at June. Did you know anything about this? He asked her. June shook her head. No, Detective, I had no idea, she said. If I had known, I would have handled it myself. He smiled and nodded. I understand, he said. He looked back at Ron. You didn't see any van on your way here? He asked. No, I didn't, Ron said. All right. Whatever they plan might happen in the morning, he said. You say your wife is at school now? Supposedly, Ron said. I see, Sparks said. I'll have to bring her in for questioning. I don't know if the DA will charge her. She doesn't seem like a planner, but she's still involved after it happened. The DA might offer her a deal. I'm not sure. Do what you have to, Detective, Ron said. I've started divorce proceedings and plan to kick her out tonight. Really? The detective asked. Do you know where she will stay? Yes, I do, Ron said. He gave the detective the address of the place he got for her that day. Thanks, he said. I'll talk to the district attorney. Meanwhile, Officer Green will stay with the three men. They won't be going anywhere. Mrs. Black, we need to search your home. Please, she said. Do whatever you need. Also, Detective, Ron said. Could you look for some videos? What kind of videos? The detective asked. Lisa blushed as Ron looked at her. Lisa, maybe you should privately tell Mom what's going on, Ron suggested. She nodded and took her mother by the arm. What's going on, Ron? June asked. Lisa will explain, Ron said. He turned back to the detective. My lawyer told me today that he spoke to the district attorney. He's interested in our case. I believe my older sister was hurt by these three men a few years ago. They claim to have a video of it and used that to keep her quiet. Detective Sparks closed his eyes and sighed heavily. Oh, wow, he said quietly. Okay, I'll talk to the DA. Meanwhile, I'll have some officers watch your area. If we see a van, we'll handle it. Will you be okay alone? I'll be fine, Detective, Ron said. Just then they heard crying from down the hall. Looking up, they saw June bent over, her hand covering her mouth. She knows, Ron thought. Good job, Lisa, he said to himself. Detective Sparks looked at Ron. You take care of them, he said. I'll handle the other three. Ron nodded. Thank you, Detective, Ron said. Detective Sparks spoke to Officer Green, then went to June and Lisa. After talking to them for a few minutes, he walked out, giving Ron a nod and a wave. About an hour later, the doctor came out and walked up to June and Lisa. Ron joined them as they went into a private room. We've finished the surgery on your husband and 2 sons, the doctor told June. We had to remove all but a small part of their private parts. The doctor informed Ron and June that the men's private parts were too damaged and had to be taken off. They might have to remove more parts, too. The men were recovering and would stay for an hour before being moved to their rooms. The doctor assured them that the men could still go to the bathroom, but wouldn't be able to have any sexual relationships again. He added that the men would stay in the hospital for a few days to make sure the condition didn't spread. The doctor then asked Ron if he knew what could have caused this. They were with my wife before we called 911, Ron replied. The doctor nodded. When was the last time you were with her? The doctor asked. Maybe a day or 2 ago, Ron said. The doctor then recommended that Ron get tested for any infections, just to be safe. Ron agreed. After this, the doctor got ready to leave and said the nurse would let them know which rooms the men were in. A nurse came in, and Ron overheard the doctor asking her, 4 more? Just like the first 3? The nurse replied, yes, exactly like the other 3 men. They're in surgery now. Ron couldn't help but smile. An hour later, Ron, June, and Lisa were taken to the rooms where Bob, George, and John were resting. They saw Officer Green sitting in the hallway, making sure the men who were handcuffed to their beds stayed there. A nurse was checking on the men. As June started to speak to George, her tone changed suddenly. Shut up, she snapped. I saw the video of you with Nancy. You're lucky the doctor cut off your parts. If he didn't, I would have. I'll make sure all 3 of you go to jail for what you planned for Ron and what you did to Lisa. Also, I'm divorcing you. I should have done it long ago. She then looked at George and harshly said that she regretted not ending her pregnancy with him and never wanted to see him again. Mom, please, George pleaded, blaming Ron for everything. That's a lie, she replied. I saw the video. I heard what you planned for your brother. You're not my son anymore. After reprimanding George, she left to talk to John. Ron looked at the 2 men lying in their beds and smiled. So, Ron said, you plan to hurt me after having others attack me. How's that working out for you? Did you really hurt Lisa? Yes, so what? George said through his pain. I told you long ago I'd make you pay. As for Lisa, she asked for it, dressing like that. She deserved it. So you're blaming her for what you did? Ron asked. Yes, and what are you going to do about it? George sneered. We won't be in prison forever. When we get out, we'll come after you and Lisa. I'll kill both of you. Shut up, George, Bob whispered. No, let him speak, Ron insisted. I want to hear his plan. It'll be a surprise, fool, George snarled. You won't see me coming. Ron laughed. At least I still have my parts, he said. He noticed the nurse listening, her eyes wide. Ron asked her if she heard George's threat. She nodded and gave Ron her contact information, offering to testify. We heard it too, Officer Green said from the doorway. Ron took out an audio recorder and played back George's words. Ron then told George that the doctor might need to remove more parts, and even if he did, prison life wouldn't be pleasant for him. Both the nurse and officer chuckled. As Ron left, he smiled and wished them a good day. He then went to John's room, seeing him strapped to his bed like the others. Your brother confessed everything, Ron told John with a smile. We have witnesses, and I recorded it all. You might lose more of your parts, too. You'll be able to use the bathroom, but not have any relationships again. Someone else will handle that for you in prison. John turned pale as Ron left, chuckling. Ron, June, and Lisa went to the hospital's coffee shop and sat down. Ron bought lattes for them. June began to cry. What will happen to me, Ron? She asked through her tears. I have no job, no way to make money, and we're going to lose everything. We'll talk about that in a moment, Mom, Ron assured her. I need to ask you something first. What's that? she asked, wiping her tears. Did you ever truly love me when I was a child? He asked. She blinked, looking surprised. Of course I did, Ron, she said. I still do. You're my son. You know that. No, Mom, I don't, he replied. You always scolded me, saying I should be like the other boys. Sure, you didn't hurt me and you weren't as mean as Dad and the boys, but I never remember you saying you loved me. When I was in college, you didn't even send a card for Christmas or my birthday. Why? I'm so sorry, Ron, she said. Your father did that. He was very strict, and they were so jealous of you. He was scared you'd become a mama's boy. It got worse when you left and he lost his job. Did he ever hurt you? Ron asked. Her face turned red and she looked away, embarrassed. After a moment, she wiped a tear and answered. A few times, but maybe I deserved it, she said. No, Mom, you didn't deserve it, Ron said. If anyone deserves it, it's those jerks upstairs. Did you know what they were doing to Lisa? By the way, Lisa, George confessed, and I recorded it. No, Ron, I never knew, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. If I had, I would have stopped them myself. Did you know that Grandpa bought the mortgage on your house? He asked. She shook her head. No, I didn't, she said. Your father handled all that and never let me see any papers. I don't even know how to pay the bills or write a check. He gave me cash for groceries and sometimes a little extra for clothes or my hair. Ron looked at Lisa, who nodded slightly. Well, Grandpa put your house in his trust, and Dad paid a little bit for rent each month, Ron explained. That's the only reason you never lost the house. Grandpa put Lisa and me in charge of the trust so we can do what we want with it. I have no problem with you staying there as long as you want, and I think Lisa agrees. I do, Lisa said. Ron nodded. We also talked about setting up some money for you so you can take care of yourself, he continued. Lisa and I can help you learn how to handle your bills if you want. I'll even pay for your divorce. Grandpa's lawyer is handling mine, and I'm sure he'll take care of yours as well. June looked at Ron, her eyes filled with tears. You would do all that for me? She asked. Even after everything? Yes, Mom, Ron said. June broke down sobbing. Lisa wrapped her arms around June, tears in her eyes. Grandpa once told me about tempering justice with a bit of mercy. June looked up at him. You're a lot like your grandfather, she said. Ron smiled. Thanks, he said. I like to think so. I'm talking about my father, she said. You never met him. He passed away before you were born. You even look a lot like him. I think you would have really liked him. He and your father never got along. Maybe that's why your father never took to you. You reminded him too much of my dad. That made sense to Ron. June looked at Ron after she calmed down. So what are you going to do about Nancy? She asked. I'm starting divorce proceedings and kicking her out tonight, Ron said, assuming she's not in jail. I don't blame you, she said. I'm so sorry about everything, Ron. I do love you. You'll always be my baby boy. Ron smiled at that. I love you too, Mom, he said. They stood up from the table. Can you ever forgive me? June asked. Ron hugged her tightly. Of course I forgive you, he said, as she held him close for several minutes. I've got to get home, June said after they ended their hug. I'm a mess. June and Lisa hugged for a few minutes. After June left, Lisa looked at Ron. That was a kind thing you did, Ron, she said. Thanks. He looked at her before giving her a hug. Anytime, he said. What she said makes sense. I guess with Dad unable to do anything, I'll have to take care of Grandpa's funeral arrangements now. I'll help you with that, she said. Thanks, he said. I'll need all the help I can get. He looked at his watch. I guess I'd better get home and get ready to deal with Nancy. Okay, she said. Let me know how it goes. Call if you need anything. Ron got home and changed into shorts and a t-shirt. He put his laptop on the table along with his briefcase. He didn't expect Nancy to be home until midnight or later and was surprised to hear the garage door open around 11:30. You're home early, he said as she walked in. It was a really bad day, she said. I just finished talking to the police. Some detective kept asking about a plot to hurt you. Interesting, Ron said. I'm going upstairs to take a shower. Then I'm going to bed, she said. No, I think not, he said. Look, I've really had a very bad day, she said. And it's about to get worse, he said. Sit down. I want to take a shower first, she said. I said, Sit down, Ron yelled. Right now! She looked at him, shocked. Slowly, she pulled out a chair across from him and sat down. I have something I want you to watch, he said, bringing up the video of her with his father and brothers. Her eyes grew wide as she watched the video. Oh, God, no, please, she cried. Watch it, he said. All of it. There's more, including video of the four of you planning to hurt me. Please, Ron, I didn't want to do it, she said. What, cheat on me or plan to hurt me? Ron said, his anger rising. None of it, she said. Don't lie, he said. You did it right after we got married. Don't deny it. I was gullible back then, but not anymore. How often did it happen with them? He asked. I'm not sure, she said. Most weekdays after you left for work. All the time we were married? He asked again. Most of the last year, she admitted. But I never wanted to hurt you. They threatened me with a video they had. A video of what? He asked. Video of what happened on our wedding day, she said, tears streaming down her face. And the other men at school? He probed. And at my last work party? How many men have you been with since we got married? She looked down, clearly ashamed. I don't know, she whispered. A few, maybe? A few? Ron repeated. What, like 5, 10, 50, hundreds? No, not that many, she replied. Well, I have a video here showing you with at least 12 men at school in just one day, he said. Do you think I paid your tuition for this? Counting the 3 morning friends, that's 15 in a day. Multiply that by a week, plus me and maybe others. I'm sorry, she said. I just needed it to get through the classes. It was just physical. I didn't take anything from you. Just physical? Took nothing away from me? Ron echoed. Did you ever think about diseases? About bringing them home to me? What's wrong with you? Her tears stopped, and she seemed angry now. Fine, she said in a strong voice. I admit it. I enjoy it. I need it. A lot of it. I love everything about it. And until recently, I never felt you inside me. I pretended. I only married you to get out of the bad place I was in. So yes, I was with many men, and I loved every moment. You pathetic excuse for a partner, Ron said. Her eyes widened at that. I may have been naive, but that Ron is gone. Did the police tell you about my family? No, they didn't, she said. Well, after being with you, their parts had to be cut off, he said. You gave them something bad and it harmed them. I overheard doctors saying more men face the same fate. From what you just confessed, I suspect there'll be many more. What? She asked, shocked. Yeah, he said. Who knows what diseases you carry now? When people find out, no man will dare touch you. What did you do to me? She asked. Nothing, he lied. I didn't force you to be with anyone. That's on you, and now you pay the price. About the divorce, my lawyer is handling it. Remember that prenup? It's active now. Your bank cards are canceled, and your things are packed. He dropped a key on the table with an address attached. Here's the key to your new place. You're out of here, he said, putting a check on the table. That's your share according to the prenup. Spend wisely. Maybe get a job. Your school fees are paid, and my lawyer has your new address. You can keep your car and scooter. Your phone will be off at month's end. Don't fight the divorce, or you might end up in online videos. You wouldn't dare, she gasped. Why not? He asked. You said it yourself. You love it. Maybe you can make money this way until no one wants you. If you're not diseased, that is. He took off her rings and removed her house key and bank cards from her purse before handing it back. Now, get out of my house, he said. She stepped back, shocked. She had never seen him this way. She thought he would always be weak for her. Please, she begged, a tear running down her cheek. I didn't mean it all. I'm sorry, I do love you. He laughed. You think this is some fantasy story where men enjoy this? You think I'm that dumb? He asked. Get out. Oh, wait, everyone in town already has. By the way, why aren't you in jail right now? Ron asked. The DA gave me a deal if I testified against your dad and brothers, Nancy said. I'm sorry, Ron. Can't we at least be friends? I really didn't want to hurt you. Friends? Do you think I want to be friends with someone who lied to me and tried to get me hurt and killed? Ron replied. To you, I was just a meal ticket. You're even more foolish than I thought. I hate you right now. I never want to see your face again. Got that? Or do I need to draw a picture for you? No, I got it, she said quietly. Can I at least come to your grandfather's funeral? As long as you stay away from me, he said. Now pack your stuff and leave. Now! Nancy walked to the door and then to the garage, struggling to get everything in her car. Once she left, Ron went out and changed the garage door code to keep her from coming back. After securing the house, he went to his lab. After what Nancy told him, Ron knew the CDC would probably get involved, so he needed to remove all evidence of what he had created. The toxin he used would leave her body 24 hours after he administered it, so he wasn't worried about it showing up in any tests. He burned the serum remains and cleaned all his equipment to remove any trace, then went to bed. Early the next morning, his doorbell rang. He went downstairs in his robe and looked through the peephole, seeing 3 men in dark suits. He opened the door and they all showed badges. "Dr. Black?" one of the men asked. Although Ron had 2 doctorates, he preferred being called by his first name. "Yes? I'm Gordon Sullivan from the CDC. I'm here to see your wife, Nancy. Is she here?" Ron shook his head. "No, she doesn't live here anymore," he said. "What's this about?" "We need to speak with her privately," Ryan said. "Like I said, she doesn't live here anymore," Ron replied. "Would you like her address?" "Yes, we would," Gordon responded. Ron gave them her apartment address and watched them leave. He felt relieved they didn't want to search his house, but knew they might return. He looked around to check if any of his brother's partners were watching, but saw nothing. He turned on the TV and made himself a cup of coffee. When he returned, he heard the local news come on. In a breaking story, local health officials say that some 40 men had to undergo emergency surgery to remove their private parts in the last 18 hours, the announcer said. Doctors say the men's things seemed to rot and die, forcing the removal. Several also had to have more surgery for their faces. Some lost their tongues and lips. The scene changed to a doctor talking to reporters. "It's been a tough night here at the medical center. Due to this outbreak, we had to involve the CDC, the doctor said. We're not sure how far this has spread, and we're very concerned." The scene then shifted to the anchor. Investigators say about 30 of the men admitted to being with the same woman. Health officials are looking for her. Due to privacy rules, the names are not being released, the anchor said. Ron laughed. 40 men? She was really busy, he thought. He wondered how many were married. Probably not for long. A few minutes later, his phone rang. It was Lisa. "Good morning," she said. "Did you see the news?" "Yes, I did," Ron said. 40 men? That must have been crazy. Lisa laughed. "I'm sure it was," she said. "By the way, I had to take Nancy to the ER early this morning." "Oh," Ron said. "What happened?" "She complained about her mouth and backside burning really bad," Lisa said. "It looked like someone had set her on fire. And I saw sores on her tongue and mouth. By the time we got to the hospital, she was complaining of severe heartburn. It doesn't look good. Did you do something to her last night?" "Other than kick her out, no," Ron said. He was concerned that traces of the toxin might have spread through contact with the men she was with. Still, he wondered why it took so long to react. He decided to play it cool. "I never touched her. Is she still in the hospital?" "Yeah," Lisa said. "Probably will be for a couple of days." "Well, the CDC came by looking for her. She was named by the men who went to the hospital. I gave them her new address," he said. "They'll find her," Lisa said. "If the CDC is involved, her admission will get flagged. I'll keep you updated." "Thanks," Ron said. After ending the call, he laughed. He didn't expect this to happen, but he felt good knowing she would face consequences from her own actions. Still, he was worried that he missed something when creating the formula and wondered if any potion he used might have affected his thinking. It wasn't like him to miss details. Maybe it was his anger and shock that caused it, he thought. He glanced out his window and saw a blue van surrounded by police cars. Officers were leading 3 big men in handcuffs to the cars. 3 men were led to the police cars. One was black, another white, and the third looked Hispanic. Ron didn't know any of them. After they were put in the cars, an officer walked up to Ron's front door and rang the bell. "Good morning, officer," Ron said as he opened the door. "How can I help you?" "Good morning, Mr. Black," the officer replied. "Detective Sparks wanted me to let you know that we've arrested the suspects. We'll have more patrols in your area for the next day or so to keep an eye on things." "Thank you, officer," Ron said. "I have some audio I think Detective Sparks would want to hear. Can I drop it off today?" That should be fine, the officer said. But he's quite busy now. You may want to call him first to let him know. I'll do that, thanks, Ron said. Have a good day, sir, the officer said before leaving. Ron closed the door, feeling relieved. He got dressed and walked over to the van where an officer was sorting evidence. The 2 cars with the suspects had already gone. Good morning, sir, the officer said as Ron approached. Are you Mr. Black? Yes, Ron replied. I'm so relieved you caught those guys. I can imagine, the officer replied. So what have you found? Ron asked. He saw a pistol and other items in plastic bags. We found some strange things here, the officer said. A ball gag, a blindfold, a large fake thing, some whips, handcuffs, and lots of zip ties. We also found a taser and a loaded pistol. They were not planning anything good. Yeah, they weren't, Ron said. Thanks again, officer. I'll let you get back to it. You're welcome, the officer said. Have a nice day. Ron thought to himself how these 3 men were really out to harm him. After calling the police station, he took the audio of their confessions to them. Looks like we have solid evidence, Detective Sparks said. I'm about to question the 3 suspects we caught this morning. They have a bad history, and this is their 3rd strike. Also, the Special Victims Unit is handling your sister's case. They found the video you mentioned, and it's clear she was drugged. Wow, Ron said. Yeah, wow indeed, Detective Sparks said. The DA is very serious about this case. Your father and brothers will be on the registered offenders list. The rest of the day felt like a blur to Ron as he prepared for Mark's funeral. The service would be soon, and he found out his grandfather had prepaid for everything, including the burial plot next to his grandmother. The headstone was up, but it needed Mark's date of death added. Ron contacted the cemetery to arrange it. He also found Mark's old military papers, showing he was a decorated Vietnam War veteran. Ron called the VA and after many calls set up a burial detail. A flag was already arranged and meant for Ron. This news made him tear up. At the funeral home, the staff were very helpful. They told Ron that most of the arrangements were already made. One staff member even wrote a nice obituary with names of Mark's descendants thanks to Ron's help. Your grandfather was very respected here, Mr. Black, the funeral director said. I'm sure many important people will attend. Once done, Ron went home and relaxed after telling Lisa what he had done. I saw Nancy today, she said. She had surgery on her face and other parts. She's not doing well. Well, she brought this on herself, Ron said. Ron, she's still your wife, Lisa said. Not for long, Ron said. Nobody made her do what she did. You didn't hear her words last night. I have no love for her. Please, Ron, she said. I don't expect you to take her back, but don't let this make you cold-hearted. Right now, I feel nothing for her, Ron said. Just don't let this change who you are, she advised. By the way, she added, I set up an appointment for Mom to see Marcus. I'll take her tomorrow morning. Thanks, Lisa, he said. Tell Marcus I'll pay for her divorce. I will, Ron, Lisa said. I also told him that Nancy will be in the hospital for a while. He plans to serve her papers there. They ended the call and Ron got something to eat. He didn't care much about Nancy, but Lisa's words lingered. Was he becoming a monster? He hoped not, but he knew he wasn't the same anymore. He went to his lab, checked his health stats, and felt good about the results. It seemed he'd found the right mix. Skipping his dose that night, he changed into workout clothes. Exercise started to help him think clearly. Mark's funeral happened a few days later and went well. Just as the funeral director said, many notable people attended, including a retired senator and some House members. They all shook Ron's hand and shared their sympathy. Ron gave a moving eulogy and thanked everyone for coming. From there, they went to the cemetery for the graveside service. He thought he was the last to leave and sat next to Mark's grave. Overwhelmed with sadness, he began to cry. Mark was more than his grandfather. He had been Ron's best friend and trusted advisor. Mark always supported him, even when no one else did. He felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to see Lisa, also crying. I miss him too, she said. He nodded. For a long time, he was the only real family I had, Ron said. Sometimes I wonder what I'll do without him. I know, Ron, she said softly. But he'll never really be gone, you know. As long as you remember him, he'll be in your heart. And I promise I'll be here for you too. Thanks, Lisa, Ron said. That means a lot. How is Mom doing? He had spent time with her earlier, but he had been busy with the ceremony and didn't get to be with her and Lisa as much as he wanted. "She's very sad, but I think she'll be okay," Lisa said. "Marcus is filing papers against Dad. He'll either get them in the hospital or in jail. They plan to take all three of them in the next few days. They had to do surgery on George, so he's recovering from that." Ron laughed a bit at that news. "Nancy said she wanted to be here, but I didn't see her," he said. "Well, she's recovering, but the CDC is keeping her in isolation right now," Lisa said. "They're not letting her see anyone for now." "Probably a smart move," Ron said. He looked at his watch. "I really need to get going," he said. "I'd like to get a good night's sleep. The last few days have been really draining." "Okay," she said. "Don't be a stranger. I'd like to have you and Mom over this weekend for dinner if that's okay." "Sounds good," he said before they left. As they walked to their cars, Detective Sparks came up to them. "I just wanted to offer my condolences and update you on your cases," he said, shaking Ron's hand. "I appreciate that, Detective," Ron said. "What's the latest?" "Well, the three suspects we picked up have been talking a lot," Detective Sparks said. "It turns out they've been in trouble before, and this could send them to jail for life. The gun they had was stolen, and your brothers bought the other items." "So it's a clear-cut case?" Ron asked. "Pretty much," Sparks said, "and that recording of their confession seals it." "What about Lisa's case?" Ron asked. "From what I've heard, SVU has enough to put all three of them behind bars for a long time," the policeman said. "Trust me, they'll be old and gray before they get out." "I hope you're right," Ron said. "Believe me, the DA is excited about this," Sparks said. "And it's an election year, so he wants to look tough on crime." "Of course," Ron said. They said their goodbyes and left the cemetery. The next day at work, his boss came up to him. "Ron, someone from the CDC is here to see you," he said. "He's waiting for you in conference room 3. "Thanks," Ron said. He cleaned up and followed his boss out of the lab. "Can you tell me what this is about?" his boss asked. "Not right now," Ron said. "I'll fill you in later." "Okay," his boss said. "Just don't take too long." "I won't," Ron promised. Gordon stood up as Ron entered the conference room. "Dr. Black," Gordon said. "Good to see you again." "Please, call me Ron," he said, shaking Gordon's hand. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to talk about your wife's case," he said. "I hope you don't mind, but I looked into your background." "And?" Ron asked. "I know all about you," Gordon said. "A very high IQ member of Mensa, 2 doctorates from MIT, a self-made multi-millionaire. Quite impressive for someone so young. Your colleagues speak highly of you. I understand you have a lab at home." "Some guys work on cars, others have a man cave," Ron said. "I like to do research, mostly theory. It's all up to code and safe. What does that have to do with my wife's case?" "Well, we have her in isolation," Gordon said. "She's recovering from her surgeries, and we've started running tests on her. So far, we've found nothing to explain what happened. I was hoping you could help us understand it better." Ron shook his head. "I don't see how I can help you," he said. "Our concern is with public safety," Gordon said. "If we understand what happened to your wife, maybe we can stop it from happening again." "I see," Ron said. "Maybe you should spend our tax dollars on public safety ads warning against certain behaviors." Gordon chuckled at that. "Perhaps you're right," he said. "Maybe we'll think about that. But I worry about this spreading. Every man could be in danger." Ron nodded. "I see your point," Ron said. "How many more cases have been reported?" "None so far," Gordon said. "But that doesn't mean anything." "And how long will you keep her in isolation?" Ron asked. "As long as it takes," Gordon said. "We need to know what happened, and we can't risk a new outbreak. My bosses agree. We've filed papers to keep her for as long as necessary." "It could take months to figure it out," Ron said. "Or years," Gordon responded. Ron smiled to himself. The idea of Nancy in isolation for years with no contact made him feel a bit better. "So what do you want from me?" Ron asked. "Like I said," Gordon began, "nothing showed up in her initial tests. Here's the revised story with simpler language and no sexually suggestive content. We'll need to do more tests," the doctor said. "Of course," Ron replied. "Can you take a look at our results?" Gordon asked. "Maybe you could help us find the right path." "You want me to consult?" Ron asked. "Is that it?" Something like that, Gordon said. This is something we've never seen before. I'm sure it is, Ron said, but I already have a job and I'm very busy. You'd have to get permission from my bosses. Already done, Gordon said, taking an envelope from his pocket. He handed it to Ron. Inside was a letter signed by the CEO. It said Ron was allowed to work with the CDC part-time for up to 3 months. It also mentioned he would be paid by both the company and the government for his help. So it's settled then, Ron said, looking at Gordon. He started to wonder if Gordon was trying to set him up. Yes, it is, Gordon confirmed. All right, Ron said, but I have a few questions. Sure, go ahead, Gordon said. First, you know I'm divorcing Nancy, right? Is that a conflict of interest? Ron asked. It could be, Gordon said, but I trust you'll stay professional, right? I guess so, Ron said. Second, I'm not a doctor. I'm not qualified to give medical opinions. I know, Gordon said, but you're great at analyzing test results. You'll have very little contact with the patient. Good, Ron said. All right, I'll do it. But remember, it's only part-time and just for 3 months. My main job comes first. I understand, Gordon said. So, see you tomorrow afternoon? Yeah, Ron said. I want a full report on her. Blood tests, urine tests, DNA, everything. Got it? We can start today, Gordon said. The DNA will take a bit longer, but we'll prioritize it. Thanks for your help. Like you, Gordon, I don't want this to happen to anyone else, Ron said. They shook hands, and Ron watched Gordon leave the room. Even though he was wary of Gordon, he wanted to find out if his formula had caused any harm to Nancy. This was the best way to do that. It shouldn't have, but he needed to be sure. He found his boss, showed him the letter, and explained what happened. Well, his boss said, it's only for 3 months, and it will make the company look good to the CDC. Keep me updated, and don't let it affect your other work. Will do, boss, Ron said. That night, Ron sat in his lab thinking about the formula he used on Nancy. He relied on his memory because nothing was written down. He believed there should be no side effects from the formula. It was supposed to clear out of her system in 24 hours. The next afternoon, Ron wore a special suit to avoid direct contact with Nancy. After putting it on, Gordon took him to her room. Ron noticed the bandages on her face. She didn't recognize him at first, but her eyes widened when she realized who he was. Mrs. Black, Gordon said. We've brought in a consultant to help us understand what happened. Please cooperate with him fully. Ron? She asked weakly. Her soon-to-be ex-husband looked at her through the suit's visor. Call me Dr. Black, he said in a straightforward tone. I'm sorry for everything, she said. I'm not here for apologies, he said. You were clear the other night, and you've gotten my response. I'm here to help the CDC figure out what happened. He looked at Gordon. Has she been tested for any diseases yet? He asked. Yes, Gordon said. She had some infections. We treated her for those before her surgery. I see, Ron said. And do you have the results I asked for? Everything but the DNA, Gordon said. That should be ready in a few days. I've rushed it. Okay, Ron said. You know those infections will affect the results. We'll need to run more tests in a couple of weeks. He looked back at Nancy and handed her a notepad and pen. I need you to list all the people you've been with in the last year, he told her. List as many as you can. If you don't know a name, describe them. Also, list any drugs you have taken. We need as much detail as possible. Is that necessary? She asked. Yes, he said. The sooner you start, the better. She nodded. When can I go home? She asked. I don't know, Ron told her. The CDC is worried you might spread something that could harm others. Oh my God, she said. What have I done? He smiled. Well, besides hurting our marriage, you might have caused a lot of harm, Ron said. I'm sorry, she said, starting to cry. So you've said, Ron told her. He turned to Gordon. I need to take these test results to my own lab to check them. I'll tell you what I find as soon as I can. Wait, you're taking those with you? Gordon asked. Yes, I have to, Ron answered. I can't check them here. But we have rules, Gordon said. And I have my own ways, Ron replied firmly. Look, you wanted my help, right? You came to me. So if you want my help, you'll need to ignore your rules for a while and let me do my job. If you can't, tell me now, and I'll inform my bosses this deal is off. All right, Ron, Gordon said. I guess we can bend the rules this time. Let me know what you find. I will, Ron said. He took the folder and went home. After eating, he went to his lab and began looking closely at the test results, entering them into his computer. He didn't like what he saw. There didn't seem to be anything that could have come from his solution, but there was something else that bothered him. He needed more information, so he called Gordon. That was quick, Gordon said. I'm not done yet, Ron replied. I need a pap smear, a sample of her tissue, and an endometrial biopsy right away. Can you get them? Yes, Ron, Gordon said. What's happening? I'm not sure, but I need these done quickly, Ron said. Got it, Gordon said. I'll do it now. Good, Ron said. Text me when they're ready. 2 hours later, Ron got a text from Gordon saying the samples were ready. He texted back, locked his lab, and left. Here you go, Gordon said, handing him a plastic container with the samples. What did you find? I'm not sure yet, Ron said. I'll let you know. He went back to his lab and started his analysis. A few hours later, he double-checked his findings. If he was right, this was a strong type of gonorrhea that no medicine could cure. Worse, it didn't need sexual contact to spread. He had heard of a man who got something like this in Southeast Asia and wondered if one of Nancy's partners had been there. Weeks later, he met with Gordon and showed him what he found. Are you sure? Gordon asked. Absolutely, Ron said. Gordon shook his head. What do we do now? Gordon asked. We need to make a new medicine for this, but it could take years, Ron said. I talked to my colleagues, and they agree. There's more. I found what looks like early cancer cells in the biopsies you took. If I'm right, Nancy might get cervical cancer in the next few years. Do you think this new bacteria caused it? Gordon asked. I don't know, Ron said. It could be, since it seems to feed on her tissue. What should we do? Gordon asked. We need to keep her isolated until we can treat the STD, Ron said. I agree, Gordon said. I'll inform my bosses. Do you want to tell her? Sure, Ron said. I'll tell her now. No point in waiting. He put on protective gear and went into her room. She looked at him as he sat next to her. How are you feeling? He asked. Horrible, she said weakly. My throat hurts. It hurts when I pee, and there's stuff coming out of me. What's wrong with me? You've caught a type of gonorrhea we've never seen before, Ron said. It has changed and is now living off the cells in your vagina and cervix. We can slow it down, but there's no cure yet. Worse, it doesn't need sexual contact to spread. Oh my God, she said, crying. What did I do? You were with the wrong men, he said calmly. Do you know if any of them came from Southeast Asia or were there recently? She shook her head. No, I didn't ask them those questions, she said. What happens now? Well, Ron said, you need to stay in isolation until we find a cure. How long will that take? She asked. He shrugged his shoulders. No one knows, he said. It could take years. Years? She exclaimed. I can't do that. I have classes and things to do. I think your student days are over, Ron said. She shook her head. No, I can't do that, she said. There's more, Ron said. More? Great, she said sarcastically. What? If I'm right, and I usually am, you'll have cervical cancer in a few years, he said. She began sobbing. Then just kill me now and end it, she said. You know I can't do that, he said. She looked at him with pleading eyes. You have to, please, she begged. I can't stand not being able to touch anyone. All I do is lay here and watch TV. They won't let me touch anything without gloves. No, he said. As much as you hurt me, Nancy, I can't do that. I won't. I can't promise you'll get well, but I can promise we'll work to find a cure. It may take 10 years, but we'll find it. And what do I do in the meantime? She asked. By now, Gordon had come to the doorway, fully suited up. You'll stay in a safe place with good care, he said. It's all we can do now. Now that we know what's happening, we can watch you closely. Black assured her, if you get cancer, we'll catch it early and handle it. What about my things? She asked. You'll stay in a nice one-bedroom apartment with all the basics, Gordon said. You can't have guests, but it's much nicer than here. We can bring your stuff if you want. No need for a car, and we'll provide clothes. And, Ron added, you can take your remaining classes online. You might have to retake some you missed. I can arrange that if you'd like. Please do, she said, if it's not too much trouble. It's no trouble, Ron assured her. She teared up, and by now Gordon had left so they could talk alone. "I'm sorry," she said. Ron nodded. "I know," he replied. "Will I ever have a normal life again?" she asked. "I don't know," Ron said. "Maybe, maybe not. Just take it one day at a time. If it helps, I might never have a normal life again either. That's how it is. If you'd stayed loyal, you wouldn't be here." "I know," she admitted. "So why?" he asked. "Why did you cheat on our wedding day? And keep cheating?" "Your dad and brothers were very pushy," she explained. "I kinda liked how they took charge. They made fun of you, and part of me liked that too. Later they said they had photos and videos and would show you unless I did what they wanted. At first I hated it, but then I started liking it more and more. It became a game. Then I needed it, so I started with the guys at school during breaks. You know the rest?" "Did you mean what you said that last night?" he asked. "At the time, yeah," she said. "But not all of it. I just wanted to hurt you then. I'm sorry." "You already said that," Ron reminded her. "Are you going through with the divorce?" she asked. "Oh, yes," he said. She nodded in understanding. "I understand," she said. "Will I ever see you again?" "I doubt it," he said, standing up. "I'll take care of your things and classes. I'll watch your progress, but don't expect to see or hear from me again. Goodbye, Nancy. I loved you once. Too bad you messed it all up." "Goodbye, Ron or Dr. Black," she said. He smiled and left the room. Gordon met him outside. "Are you okay, Ron?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm fine," Ron said. "I'll let you know when she's settled," Gordon said. "I heard your company will lead the development of this treatment, and you'll be in charge. Good luck." "Thanks," Ron said as he walked out. As he drove home, he thought about what happened. His formula made those men lose their parts, but it also helped discover this new disease. Nancy was out of his life, and because of her actions, would never have a normal life. One word came to his mind: success. Epilogue. The divorce went through quickly, especially after the judge learned that Nancy's cheating caused 40 men to lose important parts of their bodies. The criminal cases against Bob, George, and John dragged on, but they were found guilty and got 35 years to life in prison. George and John were found one morning dead in the shower, stabbed many times. "Worthless guys" was carved into their chests. Bob lasted about 6 months more. He was found hanging by his bedsheet one morning. He tried to hang himself, but his neck didn't break, and he strangled instead. All 3 were cremated at the prison as no one claimed their bodies. June's divorce was also final by the time Bob went to prison. Ron and Lisa set up a trust fund for her and taught her to handle her money. 6 months after her divorce, Lisa introduced her to a single doctor a few years older, and they started dating. They married a year later. "Take good care of my mom," Ron said with a smile at the wedding. "Oh, I will," he promised. Because of the size of Mark's estate, probate took almost a year. When it was done, both Ron and Lisa got a lot of money. They hadn't decided about the real estate, but agreed to sell the house they grew up in after their mom remarried. Lisa finally married Mr. Wright, who was a nurse at her hospital. Ron walked her down the aisle. At his insistence, she and her husband moved into Mark's old house. Ron kept working on his personal formula and declared it ready 6 months after he divorced Nancy. He made sure the company couldn't profit from it and looked for customers. He was careful about making it public, but found a company that ran a special camp for men in North Idaho. After long talks with the owners, he checked out the camp and watched how it worked. He was convinced after seeing a burn the bad wife ceremony where a woman who cheated was burned in effigy. He signed a contract with the company, hoping his formula would help men like him. He never saw Nancy again, but got updates about her. She took her classes online and finished after 18 months. She wrote to Ron many times, but stopped when he didn't reply. As expected, she got cervical cancer 2 years after his checkup. She had major surgery, then chemotherapy and radiation. She almost died a few times, but was declared a cancer survivor a year and a half after her diagnosis. Weakened and changed, she struggled each day but slowly regained her strength. She kept getting treatment for the mutated gonorrhea, but most of it was gone after the surgery and radiation. 2 years later, they found a cure for the new strain of gonorrhea. A year after that, it was approved for use. A year after his divorce from Nancy, Ron went to a Star Trek convention in his town. He dressed as a Klingon for fun. There, he met a friendly redhead named Belinda, who also dressed as a Klingon. "Nu Q, ni Q," she greeted him, which means, "What do you want?" He was impressed and started talking to her in Klingon until she couldn't keep up. They stayed together for the rest of the convention and started dating. She had just divorced a cheating and abusive husband. Like him, she was smart and part of Mensa. She worked as a researcher for an aerospace company. She wanted someone smart and strong. He shared his story and told her he wanted an intelligent and faithful woman. "Not only do I know about being faithful, but if you ever cheat on me, I'll make sure you regret it," she said with a smile. He smiled back. They spent many nights playing brain-teaser games and talking in Klingon. Ron was happier than ever before, and they fell in love. One night, he asked her to marry him. She not only accepted, but insisted they start their life together right away. At their wedding, after Ron kissed his new bride, they looked into each other's eyes, raised a fist, and surprised the guests by shouting, "Kapla!" which means success. Hey, audience! If you like this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.
Тобі кохання.